Go. Welcome everyone to our webinar this evening on electric cars and car charging. Let's make a start. I always begin by trailing the coming attractions. We've got a number of different webinars coming up over the next few weeks. We've got 2 runs of our webinar on solar panels for churches, 2 on LED church lighting for energy efficiency, and then a really important couple of webinars that are starting in March and April: church heating to replace or not replace, and choosing the right heating system. Such important topics when we're thinking about how we can move our churches towards net zero. So if you haven't already booked, please do find the webinars. They're all on our website, and I'll put the link into the chat once we've got going. Please do book and tell other people that you think would be interested. We're really happy for you to spread the word about the webinars as widely as you can. Very happy for them to be spread ecumenically and to other local groups that have got listed buildings where these kind of issues might be relevant. In terms of housekeeping, because this is being done as a Zoom webinar rather than a Zoom meeting, we're using the Q&A for questions. So the chat is perfect for things like making introductions, and if you want to share a link, if you've got a question, if you can put into the Q&A, then that's the perfect place. And what that then allows you all to do is read each other's questions, and you can click the little thumbs up sign, and those questions get more votes and they go to the top, and those are the questions that we'll start with at the end when we get to the Q&A. I am recording this talk and we post the videos of the webinars onto our website. And after today, I'll send you round the slides. I might not do it today, given that we're finishing at 7, so it's more likely to be later in the week, but I'll send you the slides and a link through to our short feedback survey that let us know whether you found it useful. Right, that's all the boring housekeeping stuff. Introductions. So I think you probably know, so I'm Catherine Ross, and I work in the Cathedral and Church Buildings Division of the Church of England centrally, and I lead on environmental issues for them. And along with my colleague Jo, we are the main sort of staffing of the Church of England's environment programme. And then more importantly, our speakers today, we've got Phil and Nigel from Cumbria Action from Sustainability, and Adi from Charge My Street, and they are about to tell you all about EV cars and EV car charging, particularly in the context of whether it works for churches to put charging posts in their car parks. So let me stop sharing and hand over to Phil, who is going first.
That's good, Phil. We can see that.
Okay. Well, it's an absolute joy and privilege to be linking with so many people who care about our precious planet and the communities that we all serve and belong to. Today, as Catherine has said, we're going to have a look at EV charging and a little bit, I'm going to start with a little bit about the background to why we're involved in this. Suffice to say, we're going to be talking for about half an hour, and then we've got some questions. So you can read what you...
slideshow. It might be easier for people to see them full size, if that's all right.
Okay, I'm just going to take off.
Sorry to interrupt you. Only just started. But at the moment, we're seeing your PowerPoint rather than the slideshow.
Beg your pardon. Okay, just going to.
Sorry. If that's tricky, don't worry. Just keep going.
It's actually there's a just a moment. The control panel is actually hiding what I'm trying to do here. So just seeing whether I can get rid of the control panel.
Just hit the slideshow, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, the slideshow is sitting underneath the sharing, the new sharing panel. Let me just see whether I can close it down.
In which case I suggest that you press on. And
Yeah,
we'll...
I'm going to press on. Apologies for that. Can you see the large? Can you see the large slide? Even though there's some smaller slides at the start. Okay, I'm just going to press on. So we're going to look at why host a charge point. What are your options? We're looking at potentially one of the charge point solutions, and I'm going to try and answer some of the questions on renewables and solar and battery storage as well. And then there will be a question and answer session. So before everyone rushes out and thinks electric vehicles, this is the silver bullet to transport, please remember that we wish to try and be as sustainable as possible. So that means the walking, the cycling, the public transport before we all leap into a single electric car. And we're very keen that electric vehicles and charging is seen in that context rather than a panacea for all of the environmental ills of transport that have gone before. In this webinar, we're talking about 100% battery electric vehicles. So we're not talking about hybrids, plug-in hybrids, or a combination. The cars that we're talking about are 100% battery charged. So why an EV now, and why change? Well, it is about making a positive difference to our planet. Up to 33% of the greenhouse gas emissions were from transport in 2016. We believe that's come down a little to about 26%, but it's still a quarter of our emissions come from transport. So it's absolutely critical we do something about that. It's wonderful that the Church of England have set net zero by 2030. It's really pushing the target and pushing the boundaries. So huge respect to everyone who's involved in that. It is about social justice. It's about including access to mobility for everyone, not just those that can afford an EV, but those that wouldn't otherwise have access. And we know that the impacts of climate change affect the poor people, those on the margins of society and geographically most. So it's a huge issue. There are legitimate concerns about electric vehicles, their manufacture and their batteries. And an individual, Dr. Ewan McTurk, has run a whole series of very forensic investigations into the environmental impacts of batteries and of manufacturing. The takeaway message which I put there is if you take the worst performing electric vehicle and you take into account its full life cycle analysis, and then you compare that with the best performing petrol engine, which is doing over 75 miles to the gallon, then after 25,000 miles, you've already, of driving an electric vehicle, you're already in the positive in terms of environmental impact. In the best case scenario, when greenhouse gases emissions are lower in an EV, in the best case scenario where the electricity to charge electric vehicle come from renewables, then after only 10,000 miles, you pass the balance point, the tipping point. And there's a graph here that, if you can see my cursor, in Norway, 100% of their electricity is produced by renewables. And therefore, the only costs, in a way, in environmental terms, are the manufacture of the car and the disposal of the car at the end. So there are no exhaust emissions, and that's what we're all heading for. So as UK transitions to renewable energy as its main and only source of electricity, that impact from electric vehicles will continue to fall. Car batteries, obviously the largest concern in a way. There has been lots of social and environmental audits. the manufacture, production, shipping, and everything of car batteries has improved enormously. They're now all collected after use, and by 2040, almost the entire car battery will be able to be reused, not just recycled. Changing to an EV now, well, the price of charging an electric vehicle for 100 miles is somewhere in the region of £4 to £6 as opposed to £13 to £16. If you get a phenomenally good tariff through the middle of the night, you might reduce that to £2 or £3, but it's a much, much cheaper way of running a vehicle. Actually, if any of you have been fortunate enough to be driven in or to drive an EV, you'll know that it's actually, as the person here, as Michael says here, an exhilarating experience. It's very, very different indeed. And with that, I'm going to pass on to Nigel, who hopefully can share all of his screen.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. So I'm hoping you can see my opening slide there.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Well, leading on from Phil's introduction there, I'd just like to talk for a few minutes about why an organisation might choose to host an electric vehicle charge point. And if we look at where electric vehicles can be charged at the moment, then really there are essentially three main options. The first of those is at home, for those people who are fortunate to have a private driveway or some form of off-road parking, then charging at home often will be the cheapest option for people to charge their vehicles. Typically there'll be slow charges, but that isn't a problem because very often vehicles are left on charge overnight, so the car can be fully charged by the morning. When you're out and about, then charging on the road, of course, so that's a different story where people are typically looking for a faster charge. They don't want to wait 8 hours very often unless the car is parked for the whole day. So these could be fast or rapid charges, and the charging time could be as low as 30 minutes in some cases. But then the third option is what's called destination charging. That could be anywhere from a workplace to a public car park, hospitality sector like a hotel or a cafe, entertainment, public buildings. We'd certainly include faith sites such as churches in that. And typically these might be fast chargers of say 22 kilowatts and provide something like 50 to 80 miles additional range in a couple of hours charging, something of that order. So those are the three main areas where people will be charging at the moment.
Nigel, do you mind turning your camera on?
My camera?
Yeah, do you mind turning it on?
Yeah, it is on as far as I'm aware.
No, you turned it off when you started speaking.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
From our point of view, we can't see you.
Well, I assure you it is on. I apologise for that.
How strange. In that case, I've interrupted you also for no reason.
It was certainly on prior to sharing the presentation, but I'll just crack on if you don't mind, Catherine, if that's okay. So the charge point network in the UK is shown on a number of sites, but particularly a site called ZapMap, which tends to be the go-to site for identifying where you can find public charge points. And as you can see, there's an expanding network here. We're showing the north of England. Most of those charge points are available fully to the public. Some may have some form of restriction where there's only access at certain times or certain limitations on who can use them. Now, a lot of EV drivers have an adage of always be charging, ABC, and it's rather analogous to having a mobile phone where there's a temptation when you're out and about with the phone just to plug it in when you see a socket and think, okay, I'll just top up the charge on that. And much in the same way when operating an electric vehicle, it's tempting always to get some more range and just to alleviate any concerns about how far you can drive with the car. So a charge point is often an opportunity to just boost that range. And church buildings, as I'm sure you know far better than me, have increasingly become community hubs in many respects. And I've been doing a bit of reading about the wide variety of uses for church buildings, and it's been very informative just to see how diverse the uses are for many of these buildings these days. So I found examples of everything from village or community shops through to food banks, social hubs, play centres, and I even found a beer festival that was operating, I think, annually in a church building. So really a very wide range of uses for community benefit. So I found examples of a vicar who apparently saved the local post office by hosting that in the church, which seemed a very innovative approach to managing local services, and also a cafe, as I'm sure a number of churches will operate in various ways. Now, traditionally, I think it's unlikely that most churches would consider hosting a petrol pump, and clearly the practicalities of doing that, supplying petrol or diesel, would be probably prohibitive anyway, even if you wanted to. So that was really a non-starter. But unlike petrol and diesel, adding an electric vehicle charging point as an amenity is a possibility. Clearly, we all have electrical supplies at our buildings, and many of those supplies would be capable of delivering power to an electric vehicle charge point. So there is an opportunity there. And if you think why you might want to host an electric vehicle charge point, here's some of the main reasons that certainly we found. The charge point can offer an important service for those people using the facility. So people who are variously at a service or using the village hall, the church hall, visiting the cafe or the post office, or any other services that are offered there. And also to local residents who perhaps might not have the benefit of off-street parking and might be able to use the charge point in the church car park as a local amenity. It also allows drivers to make good use of what's known as dwell time. So rather than wanting to sit idle in a car park in the middle of nowhere and not have anything to occupy that time while the car's being charged, associating it with an amenity like a church or a church hall is obviously a very good connection, really, and it means that somebody is making good use of their time while the vehicle is charging. It's also an excellent complement to the other environmental responses, and we've, I think, as Phil has said, been incredibly encouraged and supportive of the all the efforts made by the Church of England to look at your environmental impacts and to reduce those as part of responding to the climate emergency. And adding EV charge points does contribute to the general confidence amongst the public in the charging network. So I think switching to electric vehicles, low emission vehicles, will become a reality over the next decade, not least because of the UK government's plans to phase out the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles. And the charge point network is obviously needed to support that switch. And the more that people can see that charge points are coming, they're here, they're available, that will just generate that confidence and help to encourage people to move along that journey towards buying electric vehicles. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Adi to talk a little bit more about opportunities of how you might host a charge point in practice.
Thank you, Nigel. Let's just grab that one. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. Sorry, thank you, Nigel. So I'm going to go through the options that you have for the ways you can host that charge point at your church premises, be it church hall, church itself. Also, a few of the factors and the issues that need to be considered to get the right solution, because obviously it's not just a single solution. There are various options. As you can see, you can install and manage it yourself. There are obviously advantages to that because you keep everything in-house to an extent, but certain disadvantages that, and I'll go into those a bit more depth a bit later on. You can approach one of the large commercial players. The most famous ones are the BP Chargemaster, who run the Polar network as well, Shell and Instavolt were the three that sprang to mind when I was making this slide. We'll go for a community-based model, which I will explain in a little bit of more depth right at the end, and Charge My Street will represent option 3 on that. Before we go into that, I said there's a few factors that need to be considered. And certainly the question that I get asked more than any other is how long does it take to charge a car? It's not a straightforward answer. The simple thing is the car determines the rates. The car determines the rate of the charge in kilowatt hours, and then couple that with the size of the battery in the car, and that will tell you how long it will take to charge. There are two types of charging. There's the AC charging, which is what you will take off your house, obviously, because that's an AC supply, and off the our chargers. Charge My Street install 22 kilowatt AC chargers. In this case, the conversion from AC to DC is done in the car in order to then charge the battery. You can also get DC rapid chargers, and those ones are the big ones that you see on the top left. There is Ecotricity, which you see on a lot of the motorway network in the UK, and bottom right is the large ones that you see at Aldi's that's springing up across the country at the moment. But the ones we, and certainly AC type chargers, look like this. I mean, obviously they vary a lot, but they're very much smaller, and this very much more compact sort of setup. Just another quick thing we should address is compatibility. There were several different cabling options when EVs were first launched back in the late noughties, but certainly in Europe we have standardized, or are in the process of standardizing. If we're charging with AC, we have a type 2 charger, which is the one on the left, and if we're charging DC, we call it a combined charger, which is sort of part of a type 2 charger with a couple of bits missing and then a couple of added bits on the bottom, as you can see. So I said the charge rate, the car determines the charge. So at public charges, this is what you would expect with these. I've picked 4 of the commonly available vehicles. On the left-hand side there is the Mitsubishi Outlander, which is a hybrid, I know, but that is was the best-selling a hybrid in the UK for a while. On an AC charger, it doesn't matter how fast the charger is, that's only going to charge at 3.7 kilowatts. And similarly on a DC charger, and DC chargers go from 50 kilowatt upwards up to 200 plus. There are very few of those around. It's only going to charge at 22 kilowatt. Next one across is the Nissan Leaf, which is very well-selling car in the UK. That can only ever charge at 6.6 on an AC, even a 3-phase AC, and 46 on a rapid. Coming on to market in the next year, there are many more cars that will be able to charge at 11 kilowatts of an AC charger. That's the Audi there. And then at the moment, the only common car on the UK market that can take full advantage of 22 kilowatt AC 3-phase charging is the Renault Zoe, of which there are quite a few around. But clearly there was a technical consideration there because its DC charging is limited to 46 kilowatts. And so just also, it was mentioned by Nigel and Phil, home charging is limited to 7 kilowatts, unless you're very lucky or unusual to have a 3-phase supply into your home. But generally one of those wall boxes will charge you at 7 kilowatts. So that's a Renault Zoe there, which we've just seen, can charge at 22 kilowatts off a 3-phase AC charger, but it is limited to 7 itself off a single phase, and that has about a 52 kilowatt hour battery in it. So that's going to take about 7 and a bit hours. It's that perfect overnight slot to fully charge its battery. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this next slide, but it's just an analysis by Drakestar about the optimum charge rate versus how long the dwell time is going to be, dwell time that Nigel was talking about just now. And certainly for the sort of sites we're thinking about in this webinar, churches and church function room, church halls, that sort of 2 to 3 hour dwell time, and it's that middle of that graph you're going to see the 11 or 22 kilowatt charge rate that is your sweet spot, that's going to give you enough charge for the dwell time you've got. It should also be added that rapid charging, DC rapid chargers cost a lot more. I mean, certainly 3 to 4 times as much, and you do need a very suitable local electricity supply. When I mean local, you'd need a new connection to your local operator, and that can be very expensive. Sometimes not, but on the whole can be very expensive to run the rapid chargers, which is why the big guys tend to use them, because they have got the money to invest. Certainly if you're doing it yourself, or if a community benefit society like us is doing it, we're going to go for the more cost effective ones. And basically you don't need anything faster if you're going to have a dwell time 2, 3 or 4 hours. So there are other main issues to consider in the decision-making process about whether you should host an electric vehicle charge point. I mean, who might actually use the charge point now or in the future? It won't be a surprise to everyone to learn that we are seeing very limited use of our charge network at the moment, due to COVID, and even with the increasing take-up of electric vehicles, we're still at quite a low level. However, it is increasing. I mean, electric vehicle take-up is increasing very quickly, and certain forecasts have foreseen 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2025, which, as Nigel mentioned, is all very well if you can charge at home, but for the approximately 35% of UK households who don't have that facility, it's going to be a bit of an issue, which is hopefully where we and you listening to this webinar step in. You also need to consider, is it going to be available to the public? Is it going to be just for your congregation or people attending functions at your premises? Or will there be a mixed use? And there are various ways you can control and manage that. And then obviously you need a parking bay location. It needs to have access. You need to consider if there are any parking restrictions already in force. And ideally, I'm going to say that it would need to be accessible for disabled, because certainly e-mobility and disabled drivers are very much a good match. So how does it work? And this is pretty much whichever of the three options you're going with. You can either use the building supply if it's suitable, and you have spare load coming from your building, or you need to get a new mains electricity connection. Using the building supply, ideally you want a 3-phase one, because that gives you a bit more flexibility in those chargers I was talking about earlier. If you look on the left-hand side, that's a lovely newly installed three-phase supply at a village hall. On the right is something that we really wouldn't want to touch, and I don't think any installer would. But that will give you a single-phase supply if there's enough headroom on it, but you can't really tell from that. This is the sort of switch gear that you would need. As you can see, it's not particularly big, and you can easily just tuck it out the way. A couple of RCDs at the top there, the actual power supply, separate circuit board that goes to the charge points. You've got a meter, and then just behind the cool box on the top right there is the hub, which if you're using any kind of smart charging, you're going to need connectivity. The same thing happens on the right there, but that's housed in a cabinet if you are going with a new electricity connection. If you can attach your sockets to the wall, they won't take up much room. And these sockets you can see here are just on the other side of that first picture I showed you just now. If you go for a new electricity connection, you'll end up with something that very much looks like this. So freestanding post with a socket on either side. And that's feeder pillar in which all that switch gear and other hosting stuff is housed. So possibly you've decided to go with one of the three options. Can you make money from hosting an electric vehicle charge point? At the moment, no, not really. The costs, and certainly if you've got to go for a new DNO connection, the costs are quite high. As part of the project that we are now in, there was a first phase to it, and we did some projections, and certainly in a best case scenario, you're talking 36 to 40 months before you'd even break even. Certainly for rural areas, it was higher. It was pretty much 50 plus, 50 to 60 months. And unfortunately, that's at about the time that you're going to want to upgrade the equipment. So at the moment, it's pretty tricky. We are lucky, Charge My Street are lucky that we have government funding to sort of make that leap and to put charge points into difficult areas that really wouldn't be commercially viable. So how much will it cost to install? So if you want to do it yourself, you can get an OZEV. Now, OZEV is the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, which is a government department, and they give you a grant of £350 per socket, and that's available through the workplace charging scheme. So if you go to the OZEV government website, details there. So £350 per socket. So if you put a double in like we've just seen, that's £700. But you still need switching gear and stuff and the other equipment that's done to a certainly commercial level install rather than your domestic one, which you'd have on your house. So you're looking at another 800 quid on top of that for a dumb socket. When I mean a dumb socket, I mean a person plugs in and basically gets free electricity. You could operate possibly some kind of honesty box. It's not particularly manageable that way. The easier way to do it is to use one of the many software packages that are becoming available. There is a degree of management and maintenance you'd have to take on, but the software to an extent would allow you to do it. It just depends on the degree of risk you want to take. And if you want to de-risk your situation, then option 2 or 3 really would be preferable. Approach a large player. They do tend to be dominated by the fossil fuel companies. BP and Shell I've already mentioned, or Instavolt was the other one I mentioned earlier. That's very much a venture-backed business. And there are obviously certain ethical issues to do with that. The pluses of this is all installation and ongoing operation costs are covered, so there is no risk to the church, to your organization. In some cases, you can get a certain amount of money depending on the usage, but certainly as a commercial operator, they're going to want to have made the commercial case before they start investing their money, and that might be tricky, certainly in rural areas or areas where people got a lot of driveways. And these guys, well, certainly Shell and BP Chargemaster, those at the moment they're closed networks, which means you need their app or their card to work with them, and it won't work with any others. And that we find a little bit off-putting. We are very much committed to open and roaming agreements across the network to make it much more straightforward. So that is our community-based option. Charge My Street, I'm going to have to talk about because it's the one I know about. We're a member-owned, not-for-profit organisation. There still isn't any cost to the host if we were to able to install at your location, and we maintain and operate the system on your behalf. You're providing a community benefit, so the considerations are not wholly commercial. Certainly there's the community benefit, and there's the social inclusion, which Phil and Nigel were talking about earlier, because there are areas where the commercial guys won't touch, and if for these people to have the benefit of EV driving and the financial benefit as well, you need to install in these difficult places. I've just seen the question there, open to roaming with other networks. So just to use the analogy of our phone network in this country, you're either on EE or you're on Vodafone or you're on, that's the only two I can think of at the moment, but they don't interchange. Whereas if you go to the continent, they very much imposed roaming on all the major operators over there. So you basically just roam on to whichever network has the strongest signal to where you are. In this country, we have a whole disparate number of operators, and we believe that you should, with one app, be able to roam onto other networks. Of course, there's a commercial consideration between the networks, but certainly we are in talks with Electric Blue and Gron Contact, to name two, where all our users will be able to use their network and all their users will be able to use ours. So I've answered that question. I'll just very quickly go over the Charge My Street option. We are part of the SOSCI project, which, as it says, scaling on-street charging infrastructure, which is looking into how do we provide charging options for those people without off-street parking. The money comes from the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles and is administered by Innovate UK, because they want to see, you know, what kind of innovative stuff we can come up with to get around the commercial issues. These are our partners, CAFs, who Nigel and Phil represents. We have 3 local authorities, EO and Gone Contact are hardware, and then we have specialists at the bottom. And this is just a very nice picture. This is one of our locations. Which is West Point House on Walney Island, which is just on the edge of Barrow in Furness. And that's the local deputy mayor opening a charge point. It is the first community, or in fact public charge point in the Barrow area, which was renowned for having no charging infrastructure at all in a recent audit. How did they get to this point? Well, the owners, Heather and John, you can see there, went to our Charge My Street website, made the suggestion, and we followed it up, and we got to that lovely point at the end. I won't go into it any further. If you want to read about that particular setup, and there are some other case studies there at our website, the link is right there. And also, there are many, many more questions. I fully understand that, and I will try to answer them as they come in the Q&A, but there's a whole host of frequently asked questions at that link. And with that, I will try and find, there we go, my mouse and stop sharing. Will I? Oh. Is that stopped? Who's next? Is it Nigel or Phil? I can't remember.
You can still see your slides at the moment.
There we go. Sorry. There we go. Sorry. Right. Over to you, Phil. Thank you.
Okay.
We had a prompt earlier to click that bottom right there. Note down.
Bottom right.
Bottom right next to where it says 70% was a Daniel said to me. Click that. Next one across. That one. Is that going to work? Nah.
Blind icon.
The blind icon, which is sorry.
The one that looks like a projector screen.
That one.
The one that looks like a projector screen.
There we go. That one.
Daniel said we could click.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. Oh, I'll disappear. Oh, gone again.
So one of the questions that we regularly get is it worth putting solar PV on the roof of a church and also battery storage in order to make the case for electric vehicles and electric vehicles charging points at a church or a community centre more economically viable? Well, this gives you the scale. Essex, it's grid serve. It can charge, it has a huge solar array, about 5 megawatts. It can charge 28 vehicles very rapidly indeed. That's just to show you the scale, but much more practically, what is it like for you if you do own a church or a community centre? What are the sort of metrics and the finances behind this? Well, we know that the feed-in tariff, the money that you would get from the government for generating electricity, has now got. So that's changed the marketplace enormously. A 4 kilowatt array, which would be about the size of the church you see in the top right-hand side there, it's about £1,000 a kilowatt now. You would produce about 3,000 kilowatts a year. In a situation like that, your payback scenario on the PV itself would be about 10 years if you were using all of that electricity, and that electricity would otherwise be bought at 15 pence a kilowatt. A battery storage unit with a maximum capacity of 13.5 kilowatts. Now consider a car battery will be between about 50 kilowatts and 100 kilowatts. So we're only talking about a small fraction of the capability of charging that car would be about £7,500. So the takeaway message is, if you are considering it, and I know Catherine's put on another webinar on solar PV, which you should watch, is that solar PV still is a good idea if you're using all of that electricity. There's no one in the church or the community centre, or you're not got computers on or the lights are all off, then it's a different scenario. But if you're using all of the electricity, it's still a really good idea. Just because it's a sunny day in the summer does not mean that you will probably be able to charge all of a car's battery from the solar PV, but it will help. In a best scenario where you purchase a low tariff electricity perhaps at night, and fill up that battery storage, and you top it up with solar PV if a car isn't being charged, then you might get a payback of between 8 and 15 years. But it's a much longer if you're not using, if you don't have a very good tariff. So the takeaway messages are, it's worth considering. Certainly PV, battery is very expensive. It will come down. I wouldn't jump to it as a default position, but it's worth considering and talking to colleagues. And finally, this is on the slides that Catherine will send you, but it's just a number of really useful website links, both the Energy Saving Trust, the second one on Dr. Ewan McTurk, some government grants, and as Adi has put there, Charge My Street. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully we'll have lots of questions that we can now help to answer.
So far, we've got one question in there, but I'm sure that now the slides have been finished, people will start putting their questions in the Q&A. So please do, if you're listening in, if you've got a question, pop it in the Q&A, and then you can vote for other people's. And meantime, we will start with Jane's question, which is about the environmental and social justice impact of the mining of the cobalt and lithium for car batteries.
I will answer that if I may. Some of the biggest issues have been about the mining of lithium in Peru and South America, and using enormous amounts of water that have been transported, about environmental degradation, cobalt in Central Africa. The early social injustices and environmental impacts have now been tackled. I will not tell you that they have been completely eradicated, but all battery manufacturers have been really held to account on this. So the environmental impacts have been lessened considerably. I would also suggest that if you can go to Dr. Ewan McTurk's links, it provides a whole life cycle analysis of the lithium and the cobalt. But you have to, I'm afraid one has to look at one environmental impact and contrast it or compare it against another environmental impact. That's not to excuse any social or environmental injustice, but it is not, the issues around cobalt and lithium, I don't believe, and most people don't believe, are sufficient to prevent you from swapping from a internal combustion diesel or petrol engine to an electric engine. The emissions and the social injustice from carbon intensive fuels are of a magnitude of scale worse than cobalt and lithium.
I just add a couple of things that Amnesty International have an ongoing audit of the supply chain, which certainly Charge My Street we've signed up to. And as Phil says, they're holding the manufacturers to account. But as for many of these things, the economics of it come into play as well, is that it is just very expensive to keep getting out of the ground. And so certainly the major manufacturers are all looking at recycling their batteries once they get to end of life, and feeding all the cobalt and lithium back into the developmental chain. So it makes more sense for them to avoid taking it out of the ground. But they're going to have to an extent. So it's got both things have got to happen in combination.
So the next question from Duncan is a really good question about the economics of it. It says, I don't understand the economics of this. It sounds like a market failure. If I have prime parking spaces and people need places to park and charge, surely the hand of the market should operate so I can make a profit. Now, I think I'm probably looking at you, Adi, for this one. And I'm guessing it's a difference between if you've got a really busy city centre church where there's a lot of people wanting to park there who would be willing to pay, versus our more rural churches that might only have, a few hours a week where there would be somebody wanting to pay to charge.
Oh, certainly, yeah. So I would say yes. If you're a city, so you know, so at the moment, the big investment has been done on the motorway network, trunk roads, and in supermarket car parks, because they have precisely that footfall that as a commercial operator you're looking for. You know, but putting those units in is very expensive, and so you're looking, you know, the fossil fuel companies are used to playing the long game. They're looking at, you know, 10, 15 years and how things pay back. So they're having a land grab. That's why they want all those places. And, you know, that is the market dictating that. And certainly if I could see that if I was a, you know, busy city centre, you know, church premises, you could definitely approach those guys, because as I mentioned earlier, you could make the commercial case to them. And certainly people like Instavolt or Electric Blue I mentioned earlier, you know, they would pay you a lease for those spaces. But by the same token, for every one of those great locations, there are many, many more where the take up won't be high. If it's rural, there are many other factors. And so it's, yes, the market will drive those ones, but it's all the other ones that slip through the net that we're hoping to address from the social inclusion point of view, while still remembering that it's got to make some money to operate itself.
So if people are joining from one of those busier urban churches, if they know their location and they know that round where they are there's a shortage of parking and people pay for the current parking, then they might be thinking, okay, we might be able to make some income from this potentially through one of the larger players or a community model. If you're a little rural church, I'm wondering, is there ever a trust box kind of model? If they got the 350 grant and it costs 800 to install, can you have a trust box and say,
well, yeah, why not? I mean, just like in some of the, because we live, myself, Phil and Nigel, we live around the Lake District, and you know, many of the car parks there are trust boxes ones. You know, not the main national park ones or the National Trust ones, but yeah, there's ones, you know, you park up and everybody's used to it, so that would work. But that is, you know, those are the two extremes. I've certainly, if busy city centre, pressure parking, and certainly pressure on parking generally where people don't have off-street parking, yeah, but go to the big guys. I would, you know, I will confess I'm anti the fossil fuel lot. I would approach someone like Electric Blue. They seem to have their heads screwed on. Certainly the lady who asked me earlier about taxi charging, Electric Blue are doing taxi rank charging here in Lancaster and in other areas in the northwest. So yes, that kind of person you would approach in the first instance. Oh.
The question that's got the most votes at the moment is the attitude of planning authorities to installing charging points, especially at historic sensitive sites. And within our range of churches, we've got everything from completely you know, an unlisted church hall with a car park right through to your grade 1 listed. So you have to give a fairly broad answer.
Yes, so there are some quite specific planning regulations. You know, the very bottom line is, as long as you're more than 2 meters from the highway, and it is not over a certain height, which might be 1.7 meters, I can't remember, it just changed, I think, then it's permitted development. And certainly if the lease is less than 7 years, I think that's permitted development. But certainly as you get into grade sites, it becomes a bit of a grey area. So you try to be sympathetic, obviously talk to a conservation officer, and then we have had quite an effort. We're trying to put a charge point in a Carlisle City Council car park that is just too close to Hadrian's Wall. And so there is a little bit of to and fro there. So I don't think the planning approach is quite as advanced as it could be. It's still quite a new technology. You know, it's still a very small percentage of the market. And so there's going to be a degree of catch up.
And churches would need faculty as well.
Yeah, yes.
Charging post.
Yeah, I'm going to have to.
Right. The top of the list now is Charge My Street nationwide.
Progressively.
Are there particular areas you're looking to expand into?
Yes. So yeah, I mean, our furthest from where I sit at the moment is in Wiltshire. Certainly, I saw somebody from Twyford in Hampshire who've approached us. They're coming in from all over now. It's just a case of, you know, we're quite a small operation. We do have this OZEV grant to install 100 sites in the next year. So it's just looking for suitable sites.
Okay.
Yes, I should probably address also, and Phil and I should probably address the installing at churches, and whether there was something also about bumping onto business rates. Certainly the very specific ownership model, I know it's not the right words, but there are various different ways that churches are owned, aren't there? And we have been talking with the Diocese of Carlisle to find out a way that is acceptable. This is not just for us, for any charge point. So if you went to Electric Blue or whoever, or wanted to have that taxi rank in, or was that Durham or Sheffield? I can't remember now. But the way it would be acceptable in terms of the current setup of ownership of church grounds and church premises versus the security of tenure that an installer would be looking for. And that's in quite an advanced stage. Anything to add to that, Phil?
It's just about the question about leases on that land tenure, as you were saying, AD, and it's something for each of the dioceses to, you know, your legal teams to actually inquire of them. They're best placed to give you some of that legal advice, and there will be some differences, you know, consecrated ground in car parks and so forth that have to be considered on a site-to-site basis. But I would just advise to talk to your legal teams.
And also ask them to just drop a line to the Diocese of Carlisle, because if we do come up with a solution that with their legal team there that works across a section, or you know, or quite a section of church property, then that's the sort of thing you can roll out, and that's a solution for everyone.
That's the kind of thing to let me know when it gets sorted.
Yes.
Spread the word. Hugh has asked, things have been changing very fast, so they're likely to change fast in the next few years. Will EVs become cheaper than petrol cars before 2025? And will charging posts therefore make more sense in a few years? Nigel,
that's got to be yours for the first one.
Yeah, thanks, Adi. Big question. So the honest answer is I don't know. Certainly the purchase price of electric vehicles at the moment, the headline price can appear to be very high, but we need to put that in context for a few reasons. First of all is increasingly a lot of people seem to be going for a lease option for cars, so the whole concept of car ownership is changing, and people are typically paying on a monthly basis in many occasions. I'm one of these old-fashioned people that has an aging car which I bought outright, but I think the world is certainly changing on that. I also think that as the EV switch takes hold, and inevitably it's going to happen, the government signal a clear direction on this. So I think economies of scale, the number of EVs produced will rapidly increase, and there will be reductions in that. And of course, we have to look at EV ownership if that's the model you're going for in totality, and the running costs and the maintenance costs of EVs should be significantly lower in many cases than a traditional petrol or diesel car. So you have to look at that in the round. But it is, as has been said, a very fast, dynamic market, and I don't have all of the answers as to what's going to happen over the next decade. It'll be interesting to see.
The other thing I would add in, just as a very happy electric car driver, is unsurprisingly we were early adopters and got our first electric cars 6 years ago, and then when we more recently needed to upgrade, our new one now is a second-hand electric car, whereas going back a few years there wasn't a market for second-hand electric cars, and now there is, which makes them much more affordable. The question from Robert and Helene: if you self-manage, will there be a legal requirement to inspect and test the charging point, or does it fall under the 5-year electrical test? What a very practical and sensible question. Do you know the answer?
I would normally look at Steve, our engineer, at this point, but he's not here. I think it's annual. I think it's annual for charge points, commercial charge points. So I think, yeah, I'd have to check that, but I think that's what it is.
Okay. Oh, I'm not sure. Do we have the answer to this question? How many churches have installed charging points in the UK?
One for you,
I
Catherine.
don't know for the Church of England, and I'm guessing that you wouldn't know from your external organisations.
I think we'll have to put that question to you, Catherine.
Yeah.
I wonder if we have a renewables map that shows solar panels and heat pumps, for example, but we've never asked about charging points. Maybe it's something I will make myself a note. Maybe we need to start adding charging points to that as well. So sorry, Arthur, I don't think we can answer your question. Are there any issues of churches being bumped onto business rates? Was that what you were mentioning?
Yeah, I'm sort of alluding to that. If you were running it yourself, I wouldn't have thought so. I wouldn't have thought so, but that's, I mean, you're providing an amenity in the same way that the cafe or the I don't think that incurs business rates, does it? I'm not advanced enough for that.
And then Andrew, can you explain more about examples of charging, both for the parking and for the electricity, maybe in those 3 models of if you install and manage it yourself, if you have a large player, and if you have a community-based model?
Yeah, and I'm also going to...
Who's paying for what? I'm
also going to bring in Mark. Mark's put a question in the chat, but they sort of go together. So existing EV users, to a large extent, and we're not charging at home, use an app. I can't remember how many I've got on my phone, but I don't even know where my phone is. Use an app. The big rapid ones tend to be tap and go, and that all the new rapids have got to be tap and go. And the software solution, it depends. The software solution at the moment that are just coming on that allows you to pay for both your parking and your electricity at the same time. The rates vary hugely. We have a large document with them all on, because some suppliers charge a connection fee and then a lower rate. Others have a membership fee and then a different rate again. Certainly for rapids at motorway services, you're talking about 45-50 pence a kilowatt hour. It's about 35 pence on average a rapid 50 kilowatt rapid in a supermarket car park. And then I said you've got the other options with membership and stuff. Our lowest rate is £30 a month, which gives you 136 kilowatt hours inclusive, and then at 22 pence a kilowatt hour for anything over that, which is still more than you pay at home, which, and that social inclusion issue rears its head again. And then, as you say, if you've got prime parking, and this is discussions we've had with South Lakeland District Council and Carlisle City Council, in the terms of local authorities being squeezed on their funding left, right and centre, those are assets. Those are the money-making assets, just one single parking bay. And so you have to take that into consideration as well. But once again, does that make it unaffordable if you have to pay for parking as well as paying for the electricity? Here in Lancaster, you have to pay for parking, but the city council pay for your electricity, which I don't think is a sustainable model. But there are so many around at the moment. I'm sure it will sort of distill down, and there'll be just 2 or 3 models. But I can, Andrew, if you contact me, I can send you a really dull document with loads on there.
So that was a very complicated answer.
Sorry.
I've understood. No, it's important. So let me, if I've understood. So if the church installs and manages the posts themselves,
yeah,
they can get the grant from the government. Yes. They pay for the post, and then it's kind of up to them to have a booking system. They could let their church wardens park free, but they might say if it's a visitor, then you pay a certain bit. But the church could kind of administer that themselves through some simple booking system. I think that's the way it works when I go to Oxford Diocese. They have a charging point and I can park free because I'm a visitor. But anyway.
Yeah.
So then if they go for a larger player, the church might be paid something by the larger player who installs the post. And then whoever the company is that's installed the post, they'll have an app that someone parking there needs to use.
Yeah.
There'll be credit card payments done through that.
Yes.
And the church doesn't get involved.
No, and obviously with there's a certainly with our the app that we're having developed for us, that whole payment thing is removed from us. So we don't have any of that legal responsibility about having people's details. It doesn't happen. They just go straight past us and then was reconciled at the end of the month. There are these software solutions, because I'm big on the software solution, because there's a set of criteria that every site will have that you're going to want to like tweak. These software solutions are now becoming available, so the church could pay, I think £4 a month, I think, is for a software solution to manage their socket, which would allow you to do all that. And you have all your different users, your church wardens and your congregation members, and then your visitors, and you could give them each different rates or different priorities.
Okay. So in the first model where the church is paying for and managing the post, they could either have some simple booking system with a bit of paper and the receptionist, not a receptionist at church.
Yeah.
Or they could have an app that people are booking and paying through.
Yeah, that is.
Or in the larger player model, the church is being paid by the company that's installed the post, and then the people who are parking are doing it through that company's app.
Use their app, and all that GDPR and all that security of the transaction is not your problem.
Right. It is 7:02. Minnie's question about collective buying, that is something that Parish Buying is currently looking at. So just today I was at a webinar by Parish Buying. They're researching collective purchasing for a whole range of services, and one of those is to do with EV cars and EV car charging points, but it's relatively far down the line at the moment, so it'll be a little while before you see anything on Parish Buying about that, but it is something we're currently working on. And
can I just answer that? We're big proponents of car clubs. Car clubs would be perfect for church premises, because you're taking away that massive expense, and people get the hang of having an EV. So one of our partners is a car club, a community car club, and they are beginning to spring up all over, and they can help with insurance and all that kind of thing. So please get in contact if you're interested in that as well. And then the very last question says, with Charge My Street, does the equipment ever revert to the site owner? To the site owner. We tend to keep ours. I know Electric Blues does, but then they said to me that's because I think theirs is a 10-year agreement. It's no use after 10 years. You'd have to upgrade it anyway, so it's a bit of a non-issue. If I ask you one more question, then I'll wrap us up, which is, if someone's joined from a church and they've heard all of this and they're thinking, what do I go and do tomorrow to move this forward? What's the first thing a church should do to take this forward locally? Phil, I'll look to you since you started this off.
I think one of the first things to do, Catherine, is really to understand the needs of its congregation and its community. And actually, rather than think electric vehicle charge point, we've got to have one because lots of other people have one. We were talking in one of the other webinars about actually, if the people that are using your church because of where it is are literally either just walking down to the church because they're just very local, or if they're driving a few miles because just down the road because you're in a rural place, then actually there may not be very much demand for an electric vehicle charge point. But if your church or your community centre is in an area where lots of people don't have driveways, and you put in a charge point, you might have that charge point used all of the time, and you might be providing an enormous and really positive community and environmental service. So I think the first thing to do, Catherine, is actually to look at where your parking is and understand who might be using it, for how long might they be using it, what are your priorities for it? Is it simply for church visitors and congregations? Is it for the wider community and the public? And from there, you then start to think, yes, we absolutely need one. And then to start working out, what is the demand going to be? Is it, if we approach a big player in the market, are they actually even going to be interested? But the answer to that might be, heck, we're in the middle of, we're in the middle of Norwich. Everyone's going to want to park and charge here. And when they're not, then the community can use it. So I think it's a bit of take it slowly, assess what the demand might be, and then approach the marketplace.
Very wise words and a very sensible place to finish. Start with thinking about the need rather than thinking about what kind of connector that you need. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's joined us today for this webinar. Thank you to our speakers, Phil and Nigel and Adi, for your clear knowledge and wisdom on this subject. Please do come along to one of our other webinars over the next few weeks. Goodbye.
Right, thank you.
Brilliant. Excellent.